Hello, and welcome to The Art of Being Selfish. I am Dr. Sims, a licensed psychologist, and on this channel, we discuss ways that you can take care of yourself or be selfish so that you feel nourished and filled enough to take care of others. Now, while we will be discussing topics related to mental health on this channel, this is not a substitute for therapy. So, first of all, welcome back. I just want to say thank you to husband Dr. Sims and the rest of the guys for giving me a break last week and doing that very special episode. I hope that you enjoyed learning about the guy's perspective and seeing it from the male's perspective, and that it was just a good time hearing them chat, and I'm sure that that is not the last time that you'll be seeing husband Dr. Sims on this channel. So today, for today's session, we are going to be discussing being selfish relationally. We had a couple of people to request talking about navigating toxic family relationships, and so that's what we'll be focusing on. Thank you for that topic suggestion. I had planned on doing it closer to the holidays because I know that that's a challenging time for family, but what better time than the present? This is a vast enough topic that we can talk about it over several different sessions and still not even cover all of it. So as a clinician, I have had this conversation a lot with my LGBTQ clients, particularly again around like going home for the holidays. And I also had this conversation a lot with clients around the election shortly after that, particularly with my clients who maybe had racist family members that they had to go back home to for the holiday, and just how they were going to navigate those interactions and the toxicity that can come up in those kinds of interactions. However, there are lots of relationships that just in general, people have been navigating toxic relationships all of their lives, or they're just getting to a point in their lives where they're realizing that their relationships with family members are very toxic. So for me, the first thing that needs to happen when we're talking about navigating these relationships is taking a few factors into consideration, and we are just going to call that determining the level of toxicity in relationships. So to me, level of toxicity is a combination of the closeness of the relationship with the family member. It also is what the toxic relationship looks like. So is it just like poking fun at you every time you go home, or is it like on the other extreme of abuse? And so on that made up continuum or prism or whatever it may be, what are the dynamics in that relationship that's causing it to be toxic for you? And then the third thing is, how dependent are you in this relationship? So kind of going back to earlier when I was talking about my LGBTQ clients, a lot of them were like either just coming out of high school, kind of still dependent on their family for financial support in particular, it usually is. And so you have to determine, where are you, like what phase of life are you in, and how much does the decision around navigating this relationship impact your well-being and your livelihood, because that is going to be first and foremost. Now, toxic relationships can typically take on a variety of different forms. It can include someone, like I said earlier, poking fun or making jokes. It can include degrading you, being manipulative, pushing boundaries, being exploitative of your kindness or your generosity. It can include name calling, giving you the cold shoulder every time you come around, just being kind of mean and volatile towards you. It can include any level of abuse, emotional, verbal, psychological, any physical, any of those kinds of things can make up a toxic relationship. And it particularly is good to reflect on, how do you feel when you leave the interactions or while you're in the interactions with these people? Do you start to feel angry? Do you start to feel sad? Does your self-worth completely diminish? Are you completely depleted when you're leaving out of that space with them? Those are the things that you pay attention to determine whether or not the relationship you have with a family member is toxic. So the other thing, like I said earlier, after you've looked at kind of the toxicity of the relationship, you want to look at, what is the significance of this relationship in your life? is it a parent or is it your fourth cousin on your great grandmother's side? And the reason that that is so important is because that really determines the sense of guilt and the sense of obligation that you feel towards this person. It's also going to determine your ability to let go or shift the closeness of your relationship. Is going to determine how much you're willing to move away, how easy it will be for you to move away from the person that you're experiencing this toxic relationship with. You get to determine the level of interaction that you choose to have with this person. However, the, again, amount of guilt and the amount of obligation that you might feel towards letting go or readjusting, reevaluating your relationship with your mother, your father, is going to look a lot different than your fourth cousin on your great grandmother's side. And then the last thing is that you have to decide what you're able to or what you're willing to change about your relationship with this person. So if you, again, are a college student and you're relying on your parents financially, that's probably not the best move to cut them off. We can start thinking about what different ways we can navigate or change that relationship a little bit, but we're not going to the point of cutting off at that time. I've worked with students around and people in general around like building a plan. So let's start getting your finances in order so that when you are ready to make this change, it's okay. And even for students who have to like come out to their parents, they know that they are homophobic and they're not going to accept that. Let's start making a plan so that you become self-sufficient and you don't have to worry about continuing to be degraded, continuing to be in this toxic relationship. You can be focusing on taking care of yourself and separating that from the decision that you make around the interactions with your family members. And so with that, this looks a lot different if you're a fully functioning adult and you're not relying on your parents or your family members for anything at this point. If you're able to be self-sufficient and do things on your own without the assistance of other people, then that makes the decision-making process around what you're going to do with that family member or those family members a little different because you don't have that level of dependence piece. It gives you a lot more freedom and flexibility to do things differently in those relationships. So in taking all of those things into consideration, it's now time to start thinking about like, what do you actually do after you've assessed the situation? So first things first, as I mentioned throughout the week in my post, I talked about changing your perspective around what family is. We all have ingrained in us an ideal image of what a family looks like. Some of us more than others. Everyone's image looks different, but for the most part, we believe that our parents and our family members are supposed to be the ones who hold us down. They're supposed to be the ones that always have our back. They're supposed to be the ones that take care of us and put us first. And we usually put our parents up on this pedestal of what they're supposed to be in our lives. And when they don't meet up to that image, we're disappointed. And for some people, the not meeting up to that image is just like, they didn't buy me everything I wanted when I was a kid. And that is not quite the same thing. But for other people, it's a very devastating, like, my parents don't show me affection. They don't support me. They're always downing me. Like, I don't have any self-worth because of how my family treated me. Those are the kinds of people that really experience this level of conflict around who their parents, who their family is supposed to be, and who they actually are. But just like I encourage people in any kind of relationship, whether that's an intimate relationship, romantic relationship, or work relationship, you have to let go of your expectations of other people. And when I say letting go of those expectations, I don't mean that you can't want people to act a certain way. However, when you have an expectation that someone will act a certain way, it's a completely different experience than you just having wants and desires. Because the thing about it is you can't control anybody else's behaviors, and that expectation, saying that I expect this of you, only makes you feel worse when they don't meet those expectations. So that goes for your family too. You can't expect your family to behave in a certain way. You can want them to all day, and that's wise. Most of us want people to treat us well, but that expectation has to be let go of. A lot of people continue to engage in these toxic familial relationships just on the sole basis that they are family. If they weren't family, then this wouldn't even be a question. However, just because they're family doesn't mean that you deserve to stay and be abused and manipulated and violated by them. Blood does not give them the right to wreak havoc over your life. Additionally, the ability to change your perspective about the ideal family allows you space to accept people for who they are, not who you want them to be. Being able to say, I just don't have that relationship with my father, or I just can't expect that from them, can help you to feel more settled in that relationship and can really shift the dynamics of that relationship. However, again, it depends on the level of toxicity in the relationship. But either way, changing your perspective about the relationship, whether it's less volatile or not, is a really good step, and it's more so about it being healthy for you. Sometimes it can lead to salvaging the relationship, but changing that perspective, shifting the way that you see these ideals around family, can really be helpful in allowing you to just be more settled and be more accepting of the cards that you were dealt. Also, I think it's important to talk about honoring thy mother and thy father here. Children, a lot of us, most of us, probably all of us, were raised with the mentality of honor thy mother and thy father, regardless of whether or not you're Christian. Like, it's just one of those societal things. And I think that really does play a role too in determining how we navigate these toxic relationships, particularly with our parents, or our grandparents can be included in that as well. But let's be clear, when God said honor thy mother and thy father, he did not mean that you have to stay in an abusive relationship with them. He did not mean that you have to allow them to degrade you and take advantage of you or manipulate you. He did not mean that you allow their sin to go on without commenting on it, without giving them feedback about it. He did not say that you had to love that person. He did not say honoring and love are not synonyms. And so you really have to go back and do some research about what honoring means. Honoring is acknowledging the good of a person, right? Acknowledging them, acknowledging their humanness, and acknowledging the good of them. For some people, the good of them is just that they brought you into this world. You are grateful for your life, and you can honor, like, that is the person that birthed me and brought me into this world, and that's the extent of it. Sometimes the best way to honor someone is by removing yourself from the relationship with them. You can honor them from a distance. You can treat them with humanity. You can value them as a human being walking around this earth, because we should value all human beings walking around this earth. However, that does not obligate you to having a relationship. That does not obligate you to loving them. It obligates you to value them and honor them as a human being. Now, after you've changed your perspective, I think another important thing is to try to have a conversation with them. I think communication is extremely important in relationships to a certain extent. You have to, again, looking on this continuum of level of toxicity, is this something that you can talk about? Is this something that feedback would be helpful for? Is this someone that you think it's worth salvaging the relationship around? Do you think that they have a capacity to receive feedback and a capacity to change? And so just thinking about all of those things, I think it's appropriate to give feedback. I particularly think about, for example, people who have children and they have toxic relationships with, like, their parents or people that they want to bring around often, having the conversation of, you've been treating me like this for a really long time, and I will not bring my child around you if you continue to engage in those kinds of behaviors, and allowing them the space to be able to change. Sometimes that can work, and I think that if that is a possibility, if that is an option, giving them that option rather than just cutting them off and ending it. And a part of that too is forgiving them. So we did a few sessions a while back around forgiveness and acceptance, and so definitely go back and check those out. I'll link them in the video. But it's important that you've let go of the harbored feelings of resentment and anger and pain as well, and forgiven them for that before you try to move forward in any kind of relationship with them. If you're still hurt and you're still experiencing a lot of pain around that, it's going to be very difficult for you to move forward in navigating that relationship. Now, after you've had the conversation, that's when it's time to start noticing if changes occur, and if not, start setting your boundaries and sticking to them. So for some people, simple things as, I'm not taking a phone call from that person more than 2 times a week, or I'm not going around that person when they've been drinking, I'm not going to the family cookout when they're around a bunch of people, their behavior starts to change, or I'm not going to be by myself with that person, I need to have a supportive person with me. Really be thinking about, like, what are the boundaries that you can put in place with that person, and make sure that you're prepared to stick to them. For example, if someone is consistently manipulating you and consistently taking advantage of you, always asking you for money, never paying it back, consistently lying about you, all of those things, start paying attention to those behaviors. You've already told them, given them the feedback, you've already asked them to change. So what are some of the things that you can start to change about your interactions with them that will allow you to feel more protected and safe? We can't change other people. We can only give them feedback, allow them to make changes, and then make our own personal changes. So what are the things that you can do to start setting up boundaries with them to make sure that you feel safe in that relationship? You're not obligated to take every call. You're not obligated to attend every event. You're not obligated to any kind of behavior. You get to choose, again, depending on your level of dependency, but you get to choose how you function in these relationships with people if you so choose to have a relationship with them. Now, we've talked all about salvaging relationships, how to make it better, how to adjust different things in relationships if you need to. However, if a relationship is just that toxic and just that abusive that you cannot have a relationship with all, then it's time to make moves. It's time to remove yourself from those relationships, put distance in between you, indefinitely or just for a period of time. It doesn't have to be a selected period of time. It can just be, maybe one day I'll come back and revisit this. But if it's to the extreme of abuse, whether physical, emotional, psychological, any of that, if it's to that extreme and you've already gone through this checklist and evaluated that those other things are not going to work, it's okay to remove yourself from this relationship. Some people just can't be talked to. Some people can't be reconciled with. Some people really are not going to change no matter how hard you try. I think the most important part to take away from this is to give yourself permission to end toxic relationships, even if it is your family. Give yourself permission to distance yourself from them. Allow people space to grow. Sometimes people just need the space. Sometimes people just need the catalyst to change. So allow them that space to grow and watch from a distance as to whether or not they're growing. At the end of the day, I think that the cutoff method is a last resort. I think that it doesn't have to be a far off resort, right? So it doesn't have to be 10 years that you try to go through these other steps or any of that, especially depending on where you are in the relationship, how long this has been going on, how long you've been trying. I do think that the cutoff method, so that you don't feel any regret around the relationship, I think that in most situations, being able to try your best and do the best that you can helps you to not feel any regret around the decision that you make. And so do your best. what your best is up to you. It can be 5 conversations, it can be 1 conversation, but do your best to make the relationship what you want or need it to be. And then when all of those options are exhausted, distance yourself from that relationship. So while cutting off might be the last resort, it is still a very, very viable option. And lastly, this is probably the biggest piece to me, is learning to build your own family. So just because your blood family doesn't treat you the way that you want them to, or you just got dealt a bad deck of cards with your family, that doesn't mean that you can't have a family. Your family does not have to be just the people who birthed you or the people who are connected to you through blood. They can be other people. They can be friends, mentors, play mamas from down the street, like play cousins, play sisters, all of that, all of the extended family that we talk about that's not necessarily related to you, those can be your family, and that is okay. For some people, their step family, so their parents may have gotten married, and their stepmother or their step grandmother, like those people, that can be your family. And it's okay to build your family rather than just calling the people who are blood related to you your family. Like, allow that to be okay. Again, relinquishing yourself from that idea that this is what my family has to look like. I have to have 2 parents, 2 grandparents on each side, a big house with a picket fence, and a dog. Let those ideals go. Like, allow yourself space to have room for different images and different conceptualizations of what a family is. So that's it. Being selfish relationally, navigating toxic relationships. I hope that there are at least a couple of tidbits in here that can be helpful for how to move forward if you are experiencing a toxic relationship. If not, please hit me up in my comments, in my DMs, email, whatever, to let me know specifically like what you're struggling with or what your challenges are, and I can definitely try to incorporate that a little bit more in the future episodes. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and I look forward to seeing you all next Selfish Saturday. Make sure you do something to take care of yourself today. Bye.